He came home late on a Friday, shoulders heavy from a long day of teaching restless middle schoolers. All he wanted was to drop his bag, heat up leftovers, and sink into his couch. But the moment he turned onto his street, his heart sank. There it was again. A shiny silver Lexus parked dead center in his driveway. Not the first time. Not the second. This had been going on for months. At first he thought it was a mistake. At first he let it go. He had tried being polite. He had asked kindly. He had even knocked on her door. Nothing worked. This wasn't an accident anymore. This was entitlement. And tonight something inside him snapped. What followed would not only shock his neighbor, but the entire neighborhood. He was a patient man by nature. Day after day, he managed a classroom of kids who cared more about their phones than the periodic table. At school, patience was survival. At home, peace was his reward. His small brick house, neatly trimmed lawn, and quiet driveway meant everything to him. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could breathe. But his next-door neighbor decided it was hers too. It started small with quick excuses. She was dropping something off. She was running inside for a second. She'd wave him off with a tight smile. Like his driveway was nothing more than an extra patch of pavement for her. He let it go again and again because he didn't want conflict. But every time he came home to find her car there, a little more of his patience chipped away. One evening, after a particularly draining day, he pulled up to see not just her car, but another sleek black BMW parked in his driveway. 2 cars blocking him completely. That was the night he finally confronted her. She opened her door with a wine glass in her hand, wearing that smug little smile that never left her face. He asked her to move the cars. She rolled her eyes and laughed like he was being unreasonable. "You live right next door," she said. "It's not like you're a stranger." His jaw tightened, but he kept calm. He told her firmly, "This has to stop." She agreed half-heartedly, but the very next week the Lexus was back. He called the HOA, hoping for backup. The answer was exactly what he expected. "Unless there's damage, we don't get involved," the woman on the phone said. And since his neighbor sat on the HOA board, he knew which way the wind would blow. He left one final note on her windshield: "Do not park here again." That evening her Lexus was back, angled across his driveway as if mocking him. It was no longer about parking. It was about power. And he had had enough. The next time it happened, he didn't knock. He didn't argue. He called a tow truck. Within minutes, the Lexus was lifted onto the flatbed and hauled away. Later that night, she pounded on his door, furious. "Where is my car?" she demanded. He looked her in the eye and said calmly, "Towed. You'll find it at the impound lot." She threatened him, bragging about her HOA power. He shut the door without another word. When police arrived, they sided with him. The law was simple. She had no right to his driveway. For a brief moment, he thought the battle was over, but it was only beginning. She doubled down. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, painting him as the villain. The HOA board suddenly targeted him with complaints about his plants, his bins, even the color of his mailbox. Security was called on him while he watered his lawn. She wanted the whole neighborhood to see him as the problem. But it backfired. Neighbors who had dealt with her for years quietly began siding with him. When she parked in his driveway again, he didn't hesitate. The tow truck came back. This time, half the street watched as her car was hauled off. She screamed. He stayed calm, sipping water on his porch like it was any other Saturday afternoon. Her downfall was public. At the next HOA meeting, the board read out complaint after complaint, not against him but against her. False calls, misuse of authority, harassment. Her allies went silent. Her power was gone. Weeks later, she was removed from the HOA board entirely. Soon after, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. She packed her things and left. Her reign over the neighborhood finished. For him, peace returned. His driveway was his again. The neighbors, once silent, now spoke freely about all the times she had wronged them. She had ruled with entitlement for too long, but in the end, all it took was one quiet man finally standing his ground. Because sometimes, the smallest driveway can become the place where arrogance meets its end. He wasn't the type of man who looked for fights. His job alone demanded patience most people couldn't imagine. Day after day, he stood in front of a room full of restless middle schoolers in Lakeland, Florida. Some tapped pencils, some scrolled secretly on their phones. Others stared out the window, counting the minutes until the bell rang. Yet somehow he found a way to keep them engaged. He cracked small jokes, turned science experiments into mini mysteries, and reminded them that the world outside their classroom was filled with things worth learning. By the time the last bell rang, he was drained. His voice rough from lecturing, his feet sore from pacing, but he didn't complain. Teaching was more than work to him. It was purpose. And when the day ended, he needed his peace. That peace lived in a modest brick house with a neatly trimmed yard, a porch where he sometimes drank sweet tea, and a driveway just wide enough for his car and a guest. It wasn't much compared to the bigger houses on the block, but to him it was home. That driveway wasn't just concrete. It was his boundary, the line between his world and everyone else's. And when his neighbor began using it like her own personal parking spot, it felt like a slow invasion. At first he tried not to make it bigger than it was. The first time he saw her Lexus in his driveway, he assumed she'd made a mistake. Maybe she had deliveries. Maybe she was in a rush. He didn't even mention it. He simply parked on the street and let it slide. But the second time it felt deliberate. The third time it felt personal. She always had an excuse ready. She was just running inside. She was dropping something off. Each time, she brushed him off with the same half-smile, the kind that said she didn't see him as an equal neighbor, but as an obstacle in her way. He noticed her body language more than her words. The dismissive wave of her manicured hand, the slight tilt of her chin when she spoke to him, as though his frustrations were trivial. He was a man who lived by respect. He taught respect to children who often had none for authority. And here was a grown woman acting like his property was her right. Days passed, then weeks. He told himself not to overreact. But each time he pulled into his street and saw her car resting in his space, a knot tightened in his chest. It wasn't just about parking anymore. It was about being dismissed, about being ignored, about having his patience mistaken for weakness. At night, when he sat grading papers at his kitchen table, he found his mind drifting back to the same thought. Why did she think she could get away with it? Was it because she sat on the HOA board? Was it because she thought no one would challenge her? Or was it because she simply didn't care? He still tried to keep his cool. He knocked gently, he asked politely, and for a while she pretended to listen. But every time the cycle started again. The notes he left on her windshield vanished without a word. Sometimes she wouldn't answer her door at all. Sometimes she would, but only to offer that same fake sympathy. His patience was being tested in a way that even a classroom full of rowdy teenagers never managed. The driveway he once saw as his safe space now filled him with dread. He would slow down at the corner, holding his breath until his house came into view. Would she be there again? Would her Lexus be angled across the concrete like a trophy? Proof that she could do whatever she wanted? Every time it happened, the answer hurt a little more. And each time, the quiet man who built his life on peace and patience felt something building inside him. Something heavy, sharp, and unmovable. He knew that sooner or later the calm would break. The breaking point came one evening when he pulled into the street and froze. Not only was her silver Lexus sitting in his driveway again, but this time it wasn't alone. A sleek black BMW was parked beside it, blocking his space completely. His jaw tightened as he stopped his car at the curb. For a long moment he just sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring at the two vehicles that didn't belong to him. He took a slow breath and got out. Every step toward her front porch felt heavier than the last. He knocked on her door firmly, not once but twice. When it finally swung open, she stood there holding a wine glass, wearing a silk blouse like she had just come from some gala. Her lips curled into a smile that wasn't kind. It was the kind of smile people wore when they thought they had already won. "Oh, Reggie," she said, drawing his name out like she was addressing a child. "What's the matter?" He pointed calmly at the cars. "Whose are those?" She glanced over his shoulder like she'd forgotten they were even there. "Oh, just a friend's. We're having a little get-together. You weren't home, so I didn't think you'd mind." He felt heat rise in his chest, but his voice stayed calm. "It does matter. This is my home, not a parking lot." She tilted her head, swirling the wine in her glass. "Honestly, I think you're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. I would have moved it if you just asked. I'm asking now," he said, crossing his arms. With a sigh that sounded rehearsed, she turned and called for her guest to move the car. He stood there waiting. 10 minutes passed, then 15. At 20 minutes, the car still hadn't moved. His patience, already worn thin, was fraying. He walked back into his own home, sat on the couch, and pulled out his phone. For the first time, he searched for the number of the local towing company. The next few weeks, the pattern repeated itself. He would come home to find her Lexus angled across his driveway. Sometimes she was there, sometimes she wasn't. If he knocked, she would answer with that same fake innocence. "Oh, I was just running inside for a second," she'd say, or "The delivery driver needed space," or "I didn't think you'd mind. You always park on the street anyway." Every excuse was thinner than the last. He kept his tone steady each time, reminding her it was his property, not hers. But she treated his words like background noise, nodding politely, and then ignoring him the very next day. The more he asked, the more careless she became. Once her Lexus was parked at such an angle it blocked half the sidewalk. Another time she left it overnight, forcing him to leave his own car on the street until morning. He realized she wasn't forgetful. She wasn't in a rush. She was making a statement. She believed his driveway belonged to her whenever she wanted it. The worst part wasn't the car itself. It was her tone every time they spoke. That smug laugh under her breath. That way she narrowed her eyes like she was amused he even cared. "Reggie," she said one evening, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "you're not really going to get bent out of shape over a little driveway, are you?" He clenched his fists at his sides but stayed calm. "It's not just a driveway. It's mine." Her laugh rang out like a challenge. All right. I'll move it. No need to get so serious," but the next day it was back. He had spent years teaching children about respect. Respect for rules, respect for space, respect for each other. Yet here was a grown adult, a neighbor no less, who seemed to believe the rules didn't apply to her. And every time she dismissed him, the quiet man felt something shifting inside. This wasn't just about patience anymore. This was about principle. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam doors. But deep down a decision was forming. The next time she ignored him, he wasn't going to knock. He wasn't going to ask. He wasn't going to be dismissed again. He was going to act. By now, the situation had eaten away at him more than he wanted to admit. He had spent weeks asking, weeks being ignored, weeks watching his sanctuary turn into someone else's convenience. Finally, one morning before leaving for work, he sat at his kitchen table staring at his phone. His coffee had gone cold. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for the HOA office. The line rang, then clicked. A woman with a flat, tired voice answered, "Homeowners Association, how can I help you today?" He explained the problem carefully, trying not to let frustration leak into his words. His neighbor kept parking in his driveway without permission. He had asked her politely to stop, left notes, tried to resolve it on his own, but nothing changed. He needed help. There was a pause on the other end, then the woman sighed. "Sir, unless there is physical damage to your property, we don't usually get involved in neighbor disputes." "Have you tried talking to her?" He shut his eyes for a moment, gripping the phone tighter. "That's all I've been doing," he said. "Well," she replied, her tone sliding into that bored, dismissive rhythm of someone who'd had this conversation 100 times. "We can send a courtesy email reminding her of community guidelines, but that's about it. A courtesy email." That was their solution. He imagined her rolling her eyes as she typed it, the message disappearing into the sea of unread notifications on his neighbor's phone. He thanked the woman anyway and hung up, though the tightness in his chest didn't ease. That evening, determined not to give up, he wrote one final note himself. This one wasn't polite, wasn't soft. In bold block letters he wrote, "Do not park here again." He taped it to the windshield, stepped back and hoped maybe this time the message would stick. But when he came home after work, the note was gone. Torn away, tossed aside, and her Lexus was sitting in his driveway once more. This time angled so carelessly it stretched across half the sidewalk. It was no longer just arrogance. It was mockery. She was daring him to stop her. He stood in the street staring at the car, feeling the weight of the moment. He could almost hear her laugh, that smug tone dripping with entitlement. He could almost see the wave of her hand, the roll of her eyes. She thought his patience had no end. She thought she could keep pushing him forever. He walked up her porch steps and knocked harder this time. When she finally opened the door, she held a glass of red wine, her lips painted in a perfect smirk. "Oh, it's you," she said, voice sweet but sharp. "Is there a problem?" He gestured to the Lexus. "Move it." She sipped her wine slowly, not in a rush. I meant to text you, but since you always park on the street anyway, I figured you wouldn't mind. His fists flexed at his sides, but his voice remained steady. I do mind. This is my property. She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Reggie, honestly, you're getting bent out of shape over a little driveway. He stepped closer. No. I'm angry because I've told you again and again, and you keep ignoring me. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, as if his frustration was her entertainment. She rolled her eyes and waved her glass. Fine, I'll move it. He turned to leave, trying to let it go. But as he walked away, he heard her mutter something under her breath. He didn't catch every word, but the tone was clear. Mocking, dismissive. The kind of tone that made his blood boil. He spun back. What did you just say? She widened her eyes innocently. Nothing. But the smirk gave her away. That night, as he sat grading papers at his kitchen table, her words echoed in his mind. That tone replayed over and over. He realized something important. She wasn't going to stop. No email, no note, no polite knock on the door would change anything, and for the first time he let himself imagine a different response. A permanent one. He picked up his phone and saved the number for the local towing company. It happened on a Friday evening, the kind of night he usually cherished. The week had drained him. Stacks of papers to grade, noisy classrooms, long hours spent repeating the same lessons until his throat was raw. By the time he turned onto his street, all he wanted was silence. But there, waiting like a slap to the face, was the sight he dreaded most. Her Lexus. Again. It sat arrogantly in his driveway, angled just enough to block his garage door as if planted there on purpose. No note, no excuse, no shame. Just sitting, waiting, daring him to react. He parked his own car down the street and sat for a moment with the engine off. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel. He could hear his own breath, steady but tight. This wasn't surprise anymore. This was routine, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the line had finally been crossed. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to the number he had saved days earlier, and pressed call. Sunshine Towing. How can we help you? The voice on the other end said, I need a car removed, he replied, his tone calm but firm. It's parked in my driveway without permission. The dispatcher asked for proof of ownership. He was ready. He had his property deed in the glove compartment just in case. Within 20 minutes, headlights glowed at the corner of the street, and the tow truck rolled in with a low hum. The driver hopped out, a man who'd clearly seen this kind of situation before. He glanced at the Lexus, then at him. She's in your driveway? He handed over the deed. All mine. She doesn't live here, the driver nodded. All right then. Let's hook her up. The process was strangely quick, almost too easy. Chains clinked, metal tightened, hydraulics hissed. In less than 10 minutes, the Lexus was lifted off the ground, its rear wheels dangling helplessly. The sight gave him a satisfaction he hadn't felt in weeks. He crossed his arms and watched as the car was pulled away, disappearing down the street into the night. For the first time, the driveway looked empty, and his. He didn't have to wait long for the reaction. An hour later, the pounding started. Bam, bam, bam. His front door shook under the weight of her fists. He didn't rush. He stood up slowly, stretched his arms, and walked to the door with deliberate calm. When he opened it, she stood there in silk pajama pants and flip-flops, her hair messy. Her phone clutched like a weapon. Where is my car? She snapped, her voice shrill with outrage. He tilted his head. Oh, you mean the one that was parked illegally in my driveway? Her nostrils flared. Don't play games with me, Reggie. Where is it? Towed, he said flatly. Her mouth fell open, disbelief written all over her face. You did what? You heard me, he said. You wouldn't stop parking in my driveway, so I had it removed. Simple as that. She let out a sharp, hysterical laugh, the kind that wasn't humor but shock spilling over into madness. Oh, you are going to regret this. Do you know who I am? I'm on the HOA board. I have connections, Reggie. You have no idea who you're messing with. He gave her a slow blink. Good for you. Your car's at Sunshine Towing off Orange Blossom Trail. Have a good night. And with that, he shut the door. She didn't leave right away. For 10 whole minutes, she ranted on his porch. Her voice rose and fell in waves, sometimes threatening, sometimes whining, sometimes vowing revenge. She even called the police. But when the officers arrived, they barely gave her more than a glance. He had your car towed from his own driveway? One of them asked. Yes, she shouted. He can't do that. The officer turned to him. Do you have proof this is your property? He handed over the deed calmly. The officer skimmed it, nodded, and handed it back. Ma'am, he's within his rights. If you want your car back, you'll need to pay the impound fee. The look on her face at that moment was priceless. Her cheeks turned red, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her lips pressed into a furious line. She sputtered, but no words came out. Finally, she stormed off her porch, slamming her own door hard enough to rattle the frame. That night, as he sat on his couch with the TV on low, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Control. For once, she hadn't won. For once, her arrogance had met its match. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. A person like her didn't take losses quietly. She would come back. She would find another way, and when she did, he would be ready. He thought towing her car would settle it. That the sting of paying the impound fee, the humiliation of knocking on his door in her pajamas, the officer siding with him, all of that would finally teach her a lesson. But people like her didn't back down. They doubled down. The very next morning, a note appeared on his door in thick red marker. The handwriting was sharp and angry, the words more dramatic than they had any right to be. This is a community. We should all be more considerate of our neighbors. He stared at it, shook his head, and tossed it in the trash. If she thought he was going to play tug-of-war with notes, she was mistaken. A few days later, the HOA letter arrived. He found it tucked neatly in his mailbox, stamped with the official seal. The accusations were laughable. His potted plants, which had been sitting peacefully on his porch for years, were now suddenly in violation of community aesthetics. He chuckled out loud. He could practically hear her voice in every word. Then came another letter. His garbage bins had apparently been left out too long. Another claimed his mailbox paint was fading. By the fourth letter, he wasn't even angry. He was almost impressed. She was putting in effort, real effort, to make his life miserable. But she wasn't done. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, he was outside watering his lawn. The air was warm, the sky glowing orange. Suddenly, flashing lights filled his street. A white security SUV rolled up, tires crunching against the curb. A tall, middle-aged officer stepped out, straightening his belt like he was about to make an important arrest. Do you live here, sir? The officer asked, his tone cautious. He frowned. Yes, why? The officer cleared his throat. We received a call about suspicious activity. Suspicious. That word hit him like déjà vu. Slowly, he turned his head, and sure enough, there she was. His neighbor, standing smugly on her porch, arms crossed like she was the sheriff of the block. She pretended to be concerned, as if she had no idea why the patrol car was there. He gave the officer a long, tired look. So watering my lawn is suspicious now? The man in uniform shifted awkwardly, glancing between him and the neighbor. Look, sir, I don't make the calls. I just respond to them. Save it, he cut him off. I already know who called. Tell her to find a new hobby. The officer exhaled and nodded, retreating back into his vehicle without another word, and across the street, she smiled like she had won. But she hadn't. He marched straight up to her porch, his shoes crunching against the gravel. She blinked innocently as he approached. Oh, everything okay? She asked sweetly. I saw security here. Hope nothing serious happened. He folded his arms. You know damn well why they were here. She gasped, clutching her chest like she'd been accused unfairly. Reggie, no need to be rude. I was just concerned. We have a duty to watch over our neighborhood, don't we? He stared at her in silence for a long moment. She wanted him angry. She wanted him to shout, to give her something she could use against him. But instead he smirked. Calm, controlled, amused. I'm done playing games, he said quietly. I gave you more chances than you deserved. But you keep pushing. So let's see what happens when I push back. For the first time, her fake smile faltered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. It wasn't long before the chance came. A week later, on a Saturday afternoon, he returned home from the gym, humming to himself, feeling light and strong. As he turned the corner, his good mood evaporated. There it was again, the silver Lexus, not only in his driveway but parked dead center, blocking his garage door completely. And this time, it wasn't just about him. His whole family was on the way over for a cookout. He pulled over, shut off his engine, and just sat there for a moment staring at the car. Then he made the call. "Sunshine Towing," the dispatcher said. "It's me again," he replied, calm as ever. "Same address. Same car." The dispatcher chuckled. "Got it. We'll be there in 15. When the tow truck rolled in, he was already sitting on his porch with a folding chair, sipping water like it was any other Saturday. The driver shook his head, grinning as he slipped on his gloves. "Doing this again?" "Looks like it," he said. Chains clinked, hydraulics groaned, and once more the Lexus was lifted off the ground. That's when she burst out of her house, screaming like the street was on fire. "Stop, what are you doing?" The driver ignored her, busy with the straps. She stormed up to him, eyes blazing. "You called the tow truck again?" He looked at her, calm as ever. "You parked in my driveway again?" Her fists clenched. "I had guests. There was no parking on the street." He tilted his head. "Not my problem." Her face turned red, her voice sharp with fury. "You're being petty." "I told you I would have moved it." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You've told me that before, and yet here we are." She sputtered, searching for power in words she didn't have. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." "I can make things very difficult for you," he laughed. Actually laughed. "No, Blythe. I don't think you understand. Your car, it's already gone." She spun around just in time to see the tow truck disappear down the street. Her Lexus locked tight on the back. Her scream echoed across the neighborhood, but this time the neighbors were watching. The second tow should have been enough. Most people would have swallowed their pride, admitted defeat, and stopped pushing. But she wasn't like most people. She didn't lose gracefully. She wanted revenge, and this time, she wanted the whole neighborhood to see it. By Monday morning, an email blasted through the community mailing list. Carefully worded, dripping with passive aggression, it spoke of unnecessary disputes between neighbors and escalations that hurt community trust. It didn't mention names, but everyone knew who had sent it. She wanted him painted as the villain. The next day, flyers appeared. Yes, actual printed flyers taped to every mailbox on the street. "Is this the kind of community we want?" they asked in bold letters. "Do we tow our neighbors instead of talking to them?" The message was clear. She was spinning the story, hoping to embarrass him. But the opposite happened. One by one, neighbors began reaching out. A father down the block texted him, "Ignore her. She fined me $200 once because my son left a basketball hoop in the driveway." A woman he'd never spoken to knocked on his door just to say, "She tried to make me repaint my porch because she didn't like the color." Even a fellow teacher from his school who lived nearby sent a message, "If she parks there again, I'll split the tow fee with you." For the first time, he realized he wasn't alone. She hadn't just been tormenting him, she had been tormenting everyone. His actions had pulled back the curtain, and now the neighborhood was seeing her clearly. The real breaking point came at the next HOA meeting. He usually avoided them, but this time he showed up, sitting quietly in the front row. She sat across from him, lips pursed, posture stiff. The meeting began with the usual talk: budgets, landscaping, trash schedules. Then one of the board members cleared his throat. "We need to address a complaint filed against a board member," he said, "specifically against Blythe Vanderholt." The room shifted. She straightened in her chair, eyes flashing with disbelief. "Excuse me?" Another board member, a woman in her 60s, leaned forward. "Blythe, we've received multiple reports of harassment, misuse of HOA authority, and retaliatory actions against residents. That's ridiculous." She barked. "I'm the one being harassed." But the board didn't stop. They listed everything: her false security calls, her unauthorized community emails, her long history of petty fines and complaints. As they spoke, neighbors in the room nodded. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For once, her words carried no weight. Finally, the chairperson spoke. "We are voting to remove you from the board, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly the vote was taken. One by one, hands rose. When it was over, she sat frozen, her face pale and stunned. The power she had clung to for years slipped away in a single evening. Her downfall didn't stop there. Weeks later, he came home to find her sneaking trash cans behind her house, the same ones she had stolen from him. He snapped a photo, walked up calmly, and showed her the evidence. She had no words, just a hollow look of defeat. For the first time, she shut the door without a snide remark. Within months, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. Rumors swirled. Some said she was embarrassed. Others whispered she had made too many enemies to stay. Whatever the reason, moving trucks eventually arrived. Slowly, box by box, her reign over the street disappeared. The day she left, he stood on his porch with a quiet smile. The street felt different, lighter, freer. He pulled into his driveway without hesitation. No Lexus blocking his way. No smug laughter echoing in his ears. His home, his sanctuary, was his again. Neighbors still talked about it. The flyers, the security calls, the screaming matches. It became neighborhood lore, the time an arrogant HOA bully finally met her match. People who had once been silent now spoke openly. They shared stories of her petty fines, her power trips, her endless arrogance. And in every story, the ending was the same. She lost. As he sat on his porch that evening, the air warm and still, he realized something. For months, she had tried to make his life miserable, but in the end, she had only destroyed her own. The lesson was simple. Some people mistake patience for weakness. They push and push, believing no one will ever push back. But eventually, they pick the wrong person. And when that person finally stands up, the whole world watches arrogance collapse. For him, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. And at last, peace was his to keep.